Yeah, we're live.
Now we are.
Yep, now we are.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call this committee of the whole meeting to order, and I would first like to acknowledge that we are privileged to meet on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Squamish and St'át'imc nations. With that said, if someone could move the agenda, I'm not aware of any amendments.
The agenda of this meeting be approved.
Thank you. Seconder for that?
I will.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any discussion on the agenda? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that's carried. And we have one set of minutes to adopt.
That the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting held on May 12th, 2021 be adopted.
Thank you. Seconder for that one. Anyone speak up? Okay, Rebecca, I see your hand. Thank you. That moved and seconded. Any discussion? And any opposed to adopting those minutes? Okay, those are adopted. No trustee items, or at least if there are, we won't deal with them right now because we're going to go down to our presentation on seamless day care proposal, QP 779 and QP National. And I'm going to hand the chair over to our presenters. And welcome. Thank you for attending.
Thank you for having us here today. I'm coming to you from the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. And I have with me here on behalf of QP National, Stephen Beasley, staff. And I also have, let's move it around here. I also have Stephen Beasley, and he is going to present us with this presentation. Please enjoy. Stephen?
Hello, thank you very much. I also am really appreciative to be here today. I'm coming from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam and Squamish Nations. I work for QP National in the BC Regional Office in Burnaby, and I serve as the local government liaison. One of the things I have been working on for a while now is QP's proposal and campaign around increased access to universal childcare in British Columbia. And we are incredibly appreciative of the time to be able to present to you today about this important topic. We know that this has been a very challenging year with many more things on your agenda than you probably ever planned when you ran for office way back in what seems like a lifetime ago in 2018. But we do think that this is such a pressing topic for all of our communities. And it's obviously a growing topic of conversation for government. And the direction seems pretty clear that the BC government is looking at the school system to play an integral role in delivering more universal childcare in British Columbia. But
hey, Stephen, sorry for interjecting. Hey, we could barely hear the volume, so I'm not sure if it's from our end, but the volume's 100%. Could you just double check your microphone settings are good?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Just give me 2 seconds here. You know what, maybe. Is it any better now?
I can hear okay.
It must be us. Go ahead, Stephen. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I had another screen plugged in, and that sometimes affects if there's an external sound system. So yeah, maybe I'll just I'll quickly recap for anyone who didn't hear. So like I said, we're very appreciative of being able to have the time to talk to the group today, knowing all the the many things that trustees have been asked to take on this year, which was far in extent of what people expected when they ran. The childcare is a growing topic of conversation in our province, and in particular, since the last BC election, where the government has had a very clear direction around moving to the school system, and the last provincial budget that talked about the seamless day pilot sites, there's an increasing conversation about how the school system can help fulfill this important need across the province. And one thing I want to make clear too is that that the interest of QP in this topic is we're going to talk today about this particular model and how CUPE members can make a contribution to facilitating that model. But one thing I want to stress is that, CUPE is the largest union in British Columbia, represents more than 100,000 workers across all different sectors. And our members, as well as working people in all forums in the province, have a real need for childcare. And one of the things that led us to this conversation and this topic was really the need to provide childcare to our members working in any number of sectors, as they, as much as anyone else, struggles with the lack of childcare in BC. So if we can move on to the next slide. We usually start the conversation talking a little bit about what the current system looks like. And one of the first things I usually do in these conversations is to make the argument that it's not really much of a system. If we think about what a system of being an interconnected network, what we have in childcare in British Columbia doesn't compare to something like the school system, which really meets that standard. What we have for childcare in British Columbia is a series of independent, isolated operators that are more or less doing their own thing. A number of not-for-profits, a number of for-profits, but it doesn't particularly work as a system. It doesn't integrate into other systems that we have in BC. While the government has done, tremendous work in the past 3.5 years or so to provide more childcare in British Columbia, and while we've created thousands of new seats, we still only have a fraction of the childcare required. The BC Coalition of Childcare Advocates, with whom we work fairly closely, they estimate we have enough childcare in BC for about 20% of BC's kids, and the standard that we're looking to achieve, that the advocates and the academics are recommending, is something closer to 80%. The current system, as it exists now, run by smaller independent entities, a lot of not-for-profits that are run on a volunteer basis, just simply cannot scale to that level. The number of nonprofits we would need to start to be able to scale to that level, or the capacity of the nonprofits that currently exist they wouldn't meet that standard or requirement. And so when we look at what it would take to actually reach that goal of 80%, really it requires some level of government intervention. And that's what led us to the conversation today, right? That what the entities that are in the best position to deliver the spaces required are pre-existing government systems that are accountable and that can provide childcare spaces seamlessly across different communities, and a system where the dollars that we spend as taxpayers go as far as possible and create as many spaces as possible. Next slide, please. So in your agenda package, you would have received a summary document that takes our 32-page research document and kind of boils it down into 2 pages of main points. And a lot of what's in the presentation here is represented in that 2-pager. But a lot of the research that we did on the topic, and the more folks that we talked to from the academic world, from the advocates world on childcare, really led us to a strong belief that integration into the school system is the best way to go, particularly for before and after school care, particularly for school-age children. Because the school system is uniquely positioned to provide the spaces required for which we currently don't have capacity in other systems, or we don't have a good method of delivery. The school system has space, it has an available labor force, it has an administrative structure and other natural advantages that means that government investment in this system would go a lot further, would create more spaces than other investments. And what I want to stress about that is particularly the labor force. That if we look at one of the central barriers to creating more childcare in British Columbia, it's finding the available labor force that can fulfill the jobs required to create the spaces. And if you look at before and after school care in particular, that's a very difficult labor force to recruit and retain because of the structure of what that work looks like. And the school system is naturally positioned to be able to make a contribution there, and a contribution that really no other system can make because of the existing employees that can pick up hours and fulfill a lot of those duties. our proposal around the seamless day model is not something that we invented ourselves. Obviously, it's something that came from the research that went into the 32-page backgrounder document, and comes from a series of interviews and papers with leading experts on the topic. The seamless day model is regarded as one of the better models to integrate before and after school care into the school system, and it provides, what we'll talk about in a second, is a number of natural benefits. What I do want to stress, though, is that the system that we're proposing here, the system that we're standing behind, is one that is is highly regarded by all of the experienced sources on the topic, and certainly not one that comes from the internal imaginations of CUPE as a labor union. It comes from the folks that work in this sector and that study in this sector regularly. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. There are a list of benefits to integrating into the school system, integrating before and after school care into the school system, and in particular around the seamless day model itself. And I'm not going to list them all in detail. They exist in the materials that you have. Some of them are summarized in the presentation here, but essentially, you could summarize it as logistical benefits and pedagogical benefits, administrative and financial benefits, in terms of how childcare can be worked into the school system and how it naturally integrates with the work of the school system already. In particular, the pedagogical benefits are often written about or spoken about by advocates as something that is unique to this system, because really it takes the time that would be before and after school care that is not connected to the school day, and it connects it to the school learning, both in terms of behavior issues and in terms of classroom learning, and it allows for lessons to be reinforced through structured play, through particular activities, and it allows for that time to be used for an educational purpose and not just for a recreational purpose. And that's not to say that our proposal here is to take the school day and try to make it 9 hours long, but that it allows for relevancy of those times to the educational experience, and that ultimately that would allow some of those students to be better prepared, and it provides greater exposure to those that need additional assistance. The model is fundamentally better for parents and families. It's easier for parents and families to be able to navigate one central system with one point of drop off, one point of pickup. For kids, they have one environment with which they're familiar, that they get to stay in all day long, and the facilities we know are top facilities. We know that they're high quality facilities that provide all sorts of all sorts of benefits to kids, as opposed to the range of daycares that exist out there. And there are a number of benefits that we would say to operating the services in-house. There are obviously models whereby the service is contracted out, and that's, our argument is that those are inferior to operating in-house for a whole bunch of reasons. Not that the service itself, we're very much appreciative of all the people who work in the system currently, and the folks that operate those existing third-party those childcare facilities. I've certainly spent a lot of time toiling away under previous governments that frankly invested less in childcare. So we very much respect the work that they've done, but we think that the future is operation in-house, and that it carries a whole bunch of benefits. One of those in particular is that it makes a substantial contribution to resolving some issues we have around hours for EAs, because it's EAs that are in the best position to provide staffing to these services. So with one sort of program, school districts are able to make a huge contribution to solving BC's childcare issues, and also help resolve a long-standing issue in the system that we've struggled to find a solution to. The other point I'll make before moving off this slide is just around regional accessibility. There's not an equal distribution of childcare in British Columbia, and one of the great things about the school system is that we already have systems in place to ensure that there's access to schools in every corner of the province. And we already have transportation systems in place to ensure that where there's a substantial distance between a community and their school, there's a method to get the students there. So, really we're kind of tapping into a system that already exists, that's already solved a bunch of problems that would exist for a childcare system were we to create one from scratch. And there, we would argue that there's no point in duplicating those things, that we have a solution already in the school system. So next slide, please. And here we just sort of wanted to provide, I guess, a summary of those points together, that, what we're looking at as a system of childcare in BC through the school system, integrated to the school system, would be one that's cost effective, that ensures access to, the highest quality childcare in all communities across BC, to provide some universality of access. It's overseen by an accountable structure that already has the trust of parents. And that's a huge important piece in terms of, when parents are selecting a childcare facility, trust in that facility and in that operator is a huge piece. And we know that the school system carries that trust already. And it would make a substantial contribution to the issue I alluded to earlier, which is the issue around hours for EAs, which in turn, helps school districts with recruitment and retention of that important profession in our school systems. Next slide, please. So the structure that's described here is the seamless day in its sort of strictest definition. This is the structure that the BC government's pilot projects will take, and it involves using early childhood educators. And that's in part because of the age ranges that the government has chosen to focus on for the pilot project. But in its strictest definition, it is having an early childhood educator come in the morning, facilitate the morning program, remain with the students into the classroom day, and then overlap with another early childhood educator that would come at lunchtime, and then that person would stay with the students after school to facilitate the after school program. And it creates kind of a team environment in those classrooms. And where we have existing pilot projects, that is in large part how it operates. And the pilot projects, again, that are proposed to be rolled out in the fall are meant to operate this way. And that, again, that is in its sort of strictest definition. The seamless day model can be used as a guide for before and after school care that has variations of this. And that's certainly one of the things that we advocate for in terms of how it could work and how we could provide hours to EAs, and how the marriage of those two issues together provides an advantage to both parties. The venue for the model is meant to be the existing classrooms. And that, again, is in part because we have these facilities that are not used during some of these important times in the day, and spending taxpayer dollars to create standalone facilities that are then empty for huge parts of the day is not necessarily the most respectful way to use taxpayer dollars when the facilities exist. And so a number of the programs that exist currently, a bunch of them that are being started, are going to use existing classrooms. It's envisioned that the school districts would charge parents for a service. And in part, that's because to do it without a charge requires additional subsidies from government that the senior government decision about. So if the school district, for example, wanted to go down this path and wanted to be a $10 a day provider, that's a separate program for which there's government funding. Certainly we would encourage that, but an important part of ensuring that there's a fair set of fees is not undermining the other childcare operators in communities. So having the government come in and undercut those operators is not a fair way to proceed. Certainly we would support fully affordable, free universal childcare as an end goal, but in terms of having the system roll out, there's a recognition that fees would be part of it to help cover the cost of school districts, to ensure that school districts weren't having to take money out of their daytime operations to subsidize this service. And there's already systems in place at other school districts to facilitate those charges that can be implemented in school districts looking to take this on. So if we can go to the next slide. So what we really want to drive home in this sort of summative statement is that the seamless day model is itself a standard and is a very particular way of implementing before and after school care. And there is value to the seamless day model as it's described, in particular in the age ranges that the BC government is looking at for the pilot projects, which is kindergarten grades 1 and grade 2. As you get to the older grades, where childcare is definitely needed in the higher grades, the seamless day model, as it's strictly defined, is not, let's say, as necessary pedagogically, and that's where the real opportunity exists to use EAs for that service. The other option, even in these lower age ranges, is to add a second cohort to an existing seamless day classroom, so that you'd have the initial 12 students that would be part of the seamless day in that classroom. But in addition, you can use one additional staff person that would be an EA, and then add siblings or others to that class environment that are still part of the school community, but maybe don't come from that existing classroom, but come from a classroom where the EA perhaps comes from. So there's all sorts of different ways that it can come together. And as the province is moving towards this, school districts and QP locals are having these sorts of conversations about what is best in your community. And certainly as a staff person or QP National, we're not here to tell you what is best in your community in terms of how you might roll this out. And that's something that, the parties are kind of meant to discuss and work on collaboratively, because there are, a number of options. Next slide. And the last slide just sort of talks about some examples that exist across BC currently and across the globe, really. One of the central jurisdictions that we were influenced by was Norway, where they have universal childcare. Every parent in Norway has the right to childcare once their child turns 1, and they have a mixed model where there's some not-for-profits, but a lot of it is done by local government, where in Norway, local government and school districts are buried together. And they use a variation of the seamless day model quite successfully. In Canada, we have a growing number of examples, but certainly it's not overly prevalent, but where the examples exist, they're quite popular. So the Waterloo school system uses the seamless day model and has excellent things to say about its effectiveness. And in British Columbia, we have, as we've talked about, we have an increasing number of seamless day model sites, beginning with School District 53 in Oliver, which I think is going into their 3rd year of operation with a seamless day pilot. And so, yeah, I mean, our ask is that school districts take a serious look at what opportunities exist. And, we know, and I mean, I think we want to assure you as well that this is a conversation that we're having with school districts, but also with the BC government, because we know that school districts can't conjure up resources, and that part of what is required to support these services is provincial funding. And through our conversations with school districts, we've had excellent input about what is required, what are some of the barriers that school districts are experiencing. We've taken that back to senior government and talked about what things the BC government needs to do in terms of making it easier for school districts to move in these directions. And so certainly welcome any feedback and suggestions that you have in that regard. And, like I say, our goal is in part, yes, we're strongly advocating that this is a service that could be run in-house by school districts and that our members can facilitate that service. But equally, we're looking to create as many childcare spaces as we can across British Columbia, because a number of our members need childcare. Workers in every corner of British Columbia need childcare, and as an entity that represents 100,000 people who are workers, many of whom who have kids, it's one of the most substantial things we can do to improve the lives of our members is increase the number of childcare spaces in BC. So thank you very much. The last slide just says questions. So I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm sure my colleagues are equally.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I will open it to questions. We should try to be succinct, and I will. I'll just comment that the board will also have questions, of course, for Phil Clark, our senior staff person on this file, whom I'm sure you're familiar with. So We have a number of sources of information on this pretty interesting topic. So thank you. And that's a great presentation you did. I want to express my appreciation for it. Any quick questions from trustees? Yes, Cynthia.
In your presentation, you mentioned a little bit about transportation and that school boards already have an infrastructure set up for transportation. Is there an expectation in the Seamless Day that transportation would be provided to parents, or are parents responsible to get their children to and from the before and after care portion of that day?
Our paper doesn't talk in particular. Sorry, I should wait for the chair to.
No, we're not that
I know
formal.
the rules. I'm just getting enthusiastic. I mean, in our paper, we don't talk really specifically about that, and that's certainly something that adds complexity if there's essentially different end times for different students, and how that would interact with busing, and you know, where there is a way to facilitate that, you know, and there's a way to integrate that into your existing system. Certainly, that would be something that you know, I'm sure the parents would appreciate, but it's recognized that that's not going to be universally possible. It's why you know, presenting on the Seamless Day model is sometimes a challenge, because it is a very distinct thing and it has a kind of an academic definition as much as anything else. And what we try to convey is that, you know, though we're advocating for that system, there's room for the parties to create, to work out the details as meets the needs of the district. So if there's a way to facilitate that, then that's great. And if there isn't, then there isn't. You know, the system as exists in British Columbia is really a partnership between the Ministry of Education and school districts. And so, you know, what I want to convey too, like, if that's a concern of the school district and that's something that we can take back to government and talk about transportation, then we certainly will. Because it's not up to to you folks universally to solve these sorts of problems, and to make the system work. It's a communal effort, let's say. So, in general, school systems have transportation systems attached to them, and other entities don't in the same sorts of way. And it's much more efficient if you think about the number of the amount of transitions for kids in the middle of the day. It's better for kids to go to one central place and to have transportation to and from that place, rather than two sets of transportation a day.
Any other questions for Stephen? Yes, Rebecca. Your mute is on. There we go.
Yeah, I was just putting it off. What kind of length of day are you seeing or thinking?
Trying to remember, the provincial government has a particular length in mind when it comes to Seamless Day, and I think it is something like 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. But I mean, again, like that's for the parties to discuss in particular. However, it works best for your community or what meets the needs of the parents. My partner is a shift worker. She works 12-hour shifts. So I mean, even a service like this, if we had kids, wouldn't solve our needs, and that's the case with lots of folks. But really, that's what we'd encourage is for you to assess what the community needs are. But something in the 7 to 7:30 range in the morning to the 5:30, 6:30 range in the afternoon.
Okay.
Any other questions, Cynthia?
Just with respect to qualifications, I know the qualifications for an ECE are obtained differently than they are for an EA. And so how do you foresee addressing that? The first half of the question, and then the second half of this question is, how do those roles look in the classroom, the difference between an EA and an ECE?
Okay, so yes, thank you for that question, because we get that one a lot. The ECE qualification is designed and is required mostly for early years learning. So the sort of 0 to 5 years old. ECE is required. There's 3 qualifications listed in the Act. Now, I know they introduced new legislation yesterday, so again, this might be in flux, but there's 3 qualification levels listed in the Act. One of them is ECE, one of them is ECE assistant, and one of them is something called a responsible adult, which is exactly what it sounds like. For most school-age children, responsible adult is actually the minimum standard. And we don't advocate that necessarily as a universal minimum standard for the care and welfare of children, but that's what exists. There is not strong articulation between EAs and ECEs in terms of their qualification and the learning assessment and recognition between the two. There is a provincial conversation going on about standardization of EA qualifications, and part of CUPE's submission on that is some articulation of the 2 professions in terms of learning and skill recognition between the 2. An ECE assistant, in terms of its qualification, is essentially a 6-month program with 1 central course and the equivalent of let's say classroom practicum experience, and that is very, I wouldn't say that the learning overlaps exactly, but let's say there's a great deal of congruity between the EA profession and what would be expected in terms of an ECE assistant as a minimum. I mean, the fact is the EAs have a lot more experience in learning than that, but let's say it's different, but where the overlap exists is there. And so that's part of a conversation that we're having. So for those early years, we might advocate that there's an ECE in the classroom or part of the program, and then an EA is the secondary person. But in the older years, an EA is absolutely qualified to facilitate those programs and staff those programs. In terms of the second half of your question, it depends exactly what model that we're talking about. So under a strict seamless day model, the ECEs exist in the classroom, serving an additional educational function in terms of classroom leadership. The ECEs are not undertaking EA work, and in Oliver, they actually have both. So the ECE continues in the classroom in School District 53, and they have an EA assigned to a particular student in that classroom, fulfilling the traditional role of an EA in that space. Where we're talking older years, and the EAs are the ones facilitating the program, their existence in the classroom would be to fulfill the duties that they currently do. And in that respect, in the older years, it's not the same sort of model in terms of following that strict structure of the seamless day. It's more like integrated before and after school care, using an overlap of human resources. So the EAs in the classroom in those older years are doing exactly what they would do now, and then in the before and after program, they would facilitate those before and after school duties that you would expect of that program. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. One of my unpleasant jobs as board chair is to keep us on time if we possibly can, but I just want to find out, is there a trustee who hasn't had an opportunity to ask a question and they have a burning question that they would like to ask Stephen before we leave? Go ahead,
Yeah,
Celeste.
Rick.
Yeah, I see Celeste first and then Ian.
Yep.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks for your advocacy on this, guys. This is super important. The one thing that stood out to me that I was curious about is EA's not getting enough hours. I didn't realize that was actually a problem. I've seen that they sometimes work shorter hours, but I just wasn't aware of that being a huge issue. So that's one thing, if you can speak to that. And then the next thing is, let's say that staffing was a problem in terms of there actually not being enough EAs who wanted to take on the work. Would there be any space for using TTOCs to staff the spaces if the demand was such that there down the road simply were not enough people to staff these sorts of spaces?
Yeah, so in terms of EA hours, I mean, I wouldn't certainly characterize myself as an expert on that. So, I mean, if Cameron, Christina want to jump in, then certainly I invite that. But across the system, there's approximately 10,000 EAs, and a good number of those want more hours than they currently get. They work way less than a full-time week. A number want additional hours. A number don't. and enjoy the job as it exists now. And there's room in the world for both. But certainly it is a stressor in many districts. I'm certainly not an expert on your district, and I'll let the others comment on that, but it is a stressor in many districts, especially where there's adjacent districts where there's more hours in the adjacent district than there is in the one district, and there's people transition between the two. So it's a fairly large issue, and it's spoken to in the provincial framework agreement, and it's been an ongoing issue between the parties for years, as I understand it. And then the other thing I would just add in terms of the EA workforce is that about 20% of EAs are ECE qualified already. And so a good number of EAs are qualified for the ECE role. So when we talked, even in response to the earlier question, there's a lot of dual training between the two professions. I'm sorry. In terms of other staff doing it, yeah. It's really up to the parties what they negotiate. So I mean, that's sort of Cameron and Christina's area, not mine. But there are certainly other folks that have qualifications that would be in the bargaining unit already that maybe serve different roles that can be hired in. And there's other districts that are doing this. We talked to one yesterday that actually has 113 spaces of in-house delivery, and they have about 60% in-house. Or 60% of the staffing was drawn from the existing labor force, and 40% was drawn from were new hires. And so there's a mix, and that's just one. Mostly it's drawn from the in-house labor force.
Thanks. Ian, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just around financial barriers. We understand the Seamless comes about 50% is paid for by the provincial government. How are the other districts? Are they collecting it from parents? Are they coming out of their own surplus? How are they collecting the funds?
They're collecting the funds through parent fees.
Okay.
And there's actually one of the districts has the district I just referenced actually has worked, has developed somewhere I have the name of the program, but the program that school districts use on the IT side has the ability to create charges for parents, and the parents are paying electronically. So the solution in terms of charging exists, and parents are being charged. And there's different models. So some districts will have like one model that's sort of full-time care, and you sign up and your child goes every day. Other districts have alternatives where some children attend 3 days out of 5. Or the
Right.
drop-in rates. There's a whole bunch of different options for folks. And again, like that's why I say there's a lot of customization based on what the local needs are. We're promoting that the parties work together to assess what the parental needs are and then make sure we can respond to that.
Thank you.
Christina, I think I saw your hand waving.
Hello. I was just gonna respond to Celeste. Like mostly in our district, our jobs for EA start at a minimum of 4 hours per day, and that could be adjusted for what needs to be suited for the time at the school for students. And also they max to 5.5 to 6 hours. And there's also like the schools that are bell to bell. There's not a standard of minimum full day work of things. So that's something to increase for extra hours. That's a average is 6 hours, give or take.
Thanks. Any other trustees with questions? Well, in that case, staff, did you have any comments you wanted to make before we're through with this item?
Well, we have had the pleasure of this presentation already, and the pleasure always of working with Tina all the time. So I'll just look over to Phil to see if there's anything, because he's the keeper of our early learning programs.
No, I think, again, it's a very well done presentation and informative and giving us a lot to take back and work towards to better understand if and how this is possible to do here. But again, you guys do a really good job of this, so thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I'm going to thank, on behalf of the board, all you CUPE folks for coming and providing us with this interesting information. It's a compelling topic. The details can be debated forever, but the general principle of the country and the province needing a better daycare system probably pretty indisputable, I would suggest. So thank you so much for doing that. And what I'm going to say for the benefit of any of our public that are tuning in on YouTube is that the plan is to end this committee of the whole meeting. Yeah, I see Mo's hand up.
Sorry, Rick, just procedurally, because the board approved the agenda for the committee of the whole with everything in it. So what I'm recommending is that the board make an action item to defer rest of the items to the June 30th meeting or whenever meeting. So it's just official or whatever.
Yeah, I really appreciate that procedural advice. Thank you. So what we're going to need is a motion to adjourn and defer the rest of the business on this agenda to June 30th. Celeste?
And what about bylaw 200.2?
I'm going to go to staff for an answer to that.
So, yeah, like with that said, it's ready to go, but it's just we're kind of running out of time. So it's about next. Pardon me. Sorry. Oh, so I guess the question is like I'm not sure how much the action and discussion the second and third meeting would be needed because we already had a conversation earlier on in May. So this is really up to the board's discretion. Do we want to do it now or do we defer it until June 30th? Because in reality, the bylaw is ready to go and it's pretty complete. As per the feedback.
Rick, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
Given that we've already seen it and talked about it, I would be prepared to make the motion right now. If we can jump ahead on the agenda, if that's out of order.
I think that as long as we have unanimous consent, which I will interpret as no objection, then we could do that. And once again, I'll look to staff just for any procedural cautions. Does that look good?
You're right, yep.
Okay, thanks. So Celeste, thank you for that. And let's do that.
Okay. Can I make the motion that the Committee of the Whole recommend the Board of Education approve amended bylaw 200.2-2021 procedure for governing school board meetings as presented?
Thank you. I need a seconder for that.
Rebecca?
Thank you, Rebecca. Any discussion on that bylaw? All right. And all in favor? That's carried. And thank you for getting that done. And then the next thing we need is a motion to defer the rest of the business to June 30th and adjourn. Maybe those can't be one motion. I'm not sure, but it's probably okay.
I could make the motion that the remainder of today's agenda be placed on the June 30th agenda. And with that being done, we will also motion to adjourn. Probably two things.
Yeah, let's do the June 30th, move everything to June 30th first. So a seconder for that one.
Rebecca?
Thank you, Rebecca. Any discussion?
You want to identify committee of the whole, that's what we're postponing.
Yes.
Point.
Yep. And I had a seconder, all in favor. Yeah, that's carried. And a motion for adjournment. I think we do need a full motion for adjournment under these circumstances. So, yeah, Cynthia, seconded by Ian. Any discussion on adjournment?
No.
And all in favor? Okay, so we're going to adjourn, and in 5 minutes we'll be back into the in-camera meeting. So you'll check out of this one and back into in-camera. Thanks.